wrestling and all that kind of stuff. So she, it's actually Donnie Walsh that's on the board. She's the one, he's the one that talked to her. What about you? You're doing my job. And so she'd already quit. But anyway, yeah, she's going to shave it out anything like that. I have to do a bachelor's degree in history.
Right.
I was a healthcare CEO for 42 years. You know, you don't need to have.
It's a connecting, it's a development.
You actually need that one personality.
You do,
than anything else.
And you need to inspire them.
There's somebody.
Yeah, exactly.
And everyone else, hire the people around you that are smart.
I know, exactly.
I know it's you can't
I'm the smartest than you. That's all I
I
do.
say it all the time.
So,
You think the captain is in the right position for the things?
yeah,
Like the master.
yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So let's go ahead and one in the headhunting business.
You know, right out of now, did I sort of Berg in, and then I worked for 3 different companies, and then I got recruited to start a company with a third business.
Fancy because you went a lot.
Yeah, but I've been in it, I mean,
Been there that long?
That's where I stayed when I went out to visit.
I was a pediatrician.
But only maybe.
So horrible. You know, I was like, supervising.
there's the art part of stuff. I don't want to.
I'm studying robotics.
That's going to keep you in place. It's up to you.
I was thinking just at the start.
I mean,
I'm immunologist. I studied
Well,
also came here for my research, which is 3 years ago.
it was bad.
So
It was so soon.
Yeah, I know, yeah.
3 years ago. And then I went back to Europe. Now I'm back. I came back after 1 year to work in another research lab.
Hang out.
Oh,
When you're speaking,
yeah,
that
when
was
you're
terrible.
speaking, no, just when you're
It's like,
speaking.
you want me to come hang out?
No.
That was our one area.
No, sorry. I have English.
So don't.
Yeah, exactly. Like we have amazing class, but they went like the start of the morning, and it was a little bit hard to catch them, you know, and have a nice picture of the final lecture. So, like if you speak on the start of the hand, got that experience. But then that was always really bad.
And she's going to
He's great. After every speaker I come in, so
you're our first
Am I?
yeah, you're the first one.
I'm not as than myself.
Yeah. Just gonna close this out here.
So you did your master?
You're welcome.
You said you started studying in the US.
Hey, good to see you.
I don't know.
Good. John Warner. John Warner. Yeah.
That's Dan.
I feel like I'm all already on with.
You sing?
But I know it's still. Yeah.
Speaking at a conference in San Antonio, Centering Healthcare. It's really bad
I would say, MIT research
Obviously, a lot of people love it. Success of that, does that make sense?
in the health center world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think basically I would think
Lucas sent me a message.
Yeah, you need to get right to it.
Where in person,
Yeah.
the chit chat is kind of fun. And, you know, we saw her on there, and she was
Failure is not an option. How many times have you heard it? However, even the best have failed. This is Fail, Inspiring Resilience, where we celebrate stories of vulnerabilities, adversities, and strength, shared by exceptional people to create a more resilient society. Because failure is indeed not an option, it is required to succeed.
Good evening and welcome to Fail. This is the absolute 100% best reason to be at MIT past 5:30 p.m. on a Friday night. You have made a great decision. This edition of Fail is presented by the MIT Women's League. We're really proud to be able to bring this program to you today. By a round of applause, who has ever been to a Fail event before? Oh, hey, old friends. Who has never been to a Fail event before? Welcome, new friends. And who just walked by 10-250 and walked in and now feels like they can't leave and it's super awkward? You are right, you can't leave. You have to stay for the whole thing. So thank you for being here. Before I go any further, the housekeeping stuff I would like to do is, if you have a cell phone, and I absolutely know that you do, please take it out and silence it, put it on airplane mode, crush it into a ball and throw it in your bag, whatever you want to do. Please keep your cell phones quiet. We have QR codes up either side of the room. You can scan those to send a question to any of our speakers. I've been told that you have to scroll down a bit to get to the bit where you can submit your question, so don't get discouraged. Keep scrolling. Submit your questions and let us know if it's a general question for the whole group or if you want to direct it to one of our specific speakers. So, if you're new to Fail, and I know some of you are, this is how it goes. The whole idea is we invite like luminaries in arts and sciences and community and education and business, and we invite them up here on stage to tell you about the times that it didn't go the way they planned. The times they failed, the times they hit an unexpected setback, anything like that. We kind of want them to show a little bit where it went wrong. And here's why we do that. We are all members of the MIT community. And if you're a member of the MIT community, you know it can feel a little bit intimidating sometimes. Like, this is a place of brilliance. This is a place of excellence. And sometimes you can feel like you're walking down the corridors surrounded by giants. And that's because here, more than most places, you really are. But here's the thing about those giants. They've all failed too. And we want to kind of lift the stigma on failure, make you realize that it's okay to fail, you can pick yourself back up and try again. So when I tell people that I work at MIT, they say, oh, and I know why. It's because they're having one of those like women in STEM moments. And they're like super excited for me to tell them about my incredible research in like bioengineering. And here's the thing, I don't do incredible research in bioengineering. And so I have to be like, no, not what you're thinking. I do programming and events for MIT. And they say, oh. And I like to think that it keeps me humble. But there's a really, really, really super good reason why I don't do research at MIT. And that is that I am not qualified to do that at all. I am an arts graduate. We walk amongst you, undetected. I'm a non-scientist. But when I was at university, I loved university. And all the way through university, I was waiting for someone to tap me on the shoulder, pull me on one side, someone from MI6, and say, you are just what we've been looking for. Like, we want to pull you on and say you have to come away to like the secret agent training program. Because that's how you get those jobs, right? You don't apply for them. They just see your brilliance while you're at university and they pull you on one side. And I genuinely wanted this to happen and believed that it would. So much so that at my graduation, when I was wearing my gown and my hood, and I was surrounded by my friends and family, I had that moment of, oh, like they didn't tap me on the shoulder. And I don't think they would have left it until the last day. And so I wasn't going to be a secret agent. I was going to get a job. So I got a job. And I was on my first solo business trip for this job. I was on a plane. It was coming into land in the Middle East. I had been on a couple other business trips so far where someone was training me up, but this was the first time I was out on my own, and I was out to impress. I had a new suit. I had business cards with my name on for the first time ever. And stepping off the plane that night, I felt a little bit secret agent-ish. And I get into immigration, and there's this long line, and it's the middle of the night, and everybody's tired. And I finally get up to the counter, and the man behind the counter says, okay, I need the form, I need your passport, I need $10 for the visa on arrival. So I look in my wallet, and I don't have $10. I have $5. So I try to pay him with like the $5 and then like some loose change from different currencies. And he's like, no, we don't, you can't do that. And so I say, okay, is there an ATM I could use? And he says, look around the room, do you see an ATM in this room? And I did not see an ATM in the room. So I turned back and I thought, I'm going to give it my best, most polite question. And I said, is there an ATM anywhere in this airport that I could use? And he said, yes, but that ATM is in departures. And technically, departures is in Jordan. And you can't go into Jordan until you pay $10 for your visa on arrival. So I realize I've got to come up with a solution pretty quick. And I come up with a really bad one, which is I offer to give him my ATM card and my PIN number. And I ask him if there was someone that would go to the ATM for me. I don't recommend that. That's not a thing you should ever do. And I think that was the moment when he realized that I was quite desperate. So he goes and he talks to like one of the guards in the corner of the room, and he comes back. And at this point, everyone else is gone, right? It's just me left in the room. And he says, here's what we're going to do. You leave your passport here with me. You go through that door. You will be in departures. At the end of the corridor, there's an ATM. Be quick. And I thank him profusely, and the man unlocks the door, and I leave my passport, and I go running down the corridor, and at the end of the corridor, like, I run past, like, all these bright lights and, like, Clinique counters and, like, those giant Toblerones, and I go past all of it, and at the end of the corridor, like, there's the ATM, and it's one of those, like, freestanding ATMs that's, like, really brightly colored, and you know it's going to charge you, like, $10 to take out $20, but I was like, I do not care. Like, I've never been happier to see a machine in my life. I put the card in, I punch in the number, and it says, unable to contact your financial institution. That's fine. I have other cards. So I get the next card out of my wallet, and I put it in, and I punch in my PIN number, and it says, unable to contact your financial institution. I try every single card in my wallet. I try, like, the expired cards in my wallet, and none of them work. And I get down to the last card, and I really don't want to use it because it's the company American Express. And they told me, never, ever, ever withdraw cash on the company American Express because you get charged this huge interest rate. And I'm like, do you know what? Whatever it is, I will just pay it back. It's got to be better than the alternative. So I put the card in, I punch in the number. It says, unable to contact your financial institution, and then it eats the card. And I think I went feral in those like following moments. Like I remember like pressing all the buttons, like there has to be a way to get this back. But there isn't. Like once it's gone, it is gone. So I turn around, and then out of the other side of my eye, I see another ATM, and it's a different color, so it's a different bank. So I'm like, do you know what? In for a penny, in for a pound. I'm going to put all my cards in that one and see what happens. And I run over, and I go to put my card in, and I realize that the lights are off on the machine, and it's dead. And that's it. I'm out of options. So I start walking back down slowly past like the Clinique counters and the perfume sample people and the Toblerones. And as I'm walking back along, I was sort of thinking, I don't know what happens now. This has never happened to me before. Like I had a flight out of Jordan, but it was in a week's time. And the only credit card I had with a high enough credit limit to buy a new flight just got eaten by that machine. And I was like, do they put me in a cell? I've never been deported before. Like I don't know how it goes. And as I get back to the door, I'll knock on the door for the man to let me back in, and I think, this is why MI6 never tapped you on the shoulder. Like, James Bond would always have $10 for his visa on arrival. And so the man opens the door and he lets me back in, and I go back up to the counter, and I'm still wearing my suit, and I'm trying to look professional, like this happens all the time, like there must be a solution to this problem. And I start explaining what happened with the ATM, and I put the card in and it didn't work, and I put another card in and it didn't work, and I'm trying to look professional, but like the more I try to like hold it together, the more I can feel I'm starting to lose it, and my suit just feels too big and so silly, and I realize I'm so far out of my depth. And I just tell this whole story to this man. And then I kind of stare at him. And by this point, it's probably about 12:45 in the morning. There's no one else left. There's just me and him and the guard. And he gives this big sigh. And he reaches back around behind him. And he pulled out his wallet. And I started to say something, and he gave me the signal, like don't say anything, because pretty sure what he was about to do is not technically legal. And he took $10 out of his wallet, and he put it on the table in front of me. He stamped my passport. He took my form. He handed the passport back to me, and he said, "Welcome to Jordan." So sometimes failure happens because you just don't Google entry requirements. But I learned a lot about myself on that day. So thank you for letting me share that with you. The next person we're going to bring up to stage is someone that is super important to us here at FAIL. He has been an advisor to FAIL since we first started doing these events in 2018. He's an MIT fellow. He set up an MIT research project in India that had him go to India 12 times in 3 years. Imagine pre-pandemic, so don't feel bad if you haven't done that level of travel lately. He's worked with hundreds of MIT students, and he organizes and curates TEDx Boston and TEDx MIT. Please welcome John Werner.
Thanks, Christy. So who's an MIT grad here? Or at MIT as a student? Who graduated? All right. So I have an artifact here. This is an MIT yearbook from 1923. And I brought it today because this is the academic year 2022 to 2023. So this is 100 years old. And if you go into this yearbook, you'll find McDonald, the guy who founded the airline company 17 years after the Wright brothers flew, that became McDonnell Douglas, which had a big role in MIT students helping people go to the moon down the road. If you also look in this yearbook, you'll find a guy who was born Alec Bell. His mom and his wife were deaf, and he moved to Boston as an instructor, an adjunct at BU, and he taught students not to fail. He taught deaf students how to communicate. He would put his lips to his wife and his mom's forehead to vibrate to them so they could understand him. So Alec, you know him as Alexander Graham Bell. When he was 11, he asked his parents for his birthday to get a middle name. That's where Graham came in. And when he got married to his lovely wife, she said, "I don't like Alec, I want Alexander." So Alexander Graham Bell. And when MIT was 75, they had 1,500 MIT alumni in Symphony Hall and had 5,000 people listen to a contraption that Alexander Graham Bell invented. So he taught the deaf how to communicate. But he hung out at the MIT campus, which was in Copley Square, and he experimented many times and created the first telephone. And the first telephone call was made between downtown Boston and a few hundred yards from here when Thomas Watson listened to it. Now, the reason I say this is an opening story is think of the next 100 years. So during this period, it was the plane and the telephone, and look how that shaped our society. Think of all the things that are going on around us on this amazing campus. And how can they impact the next 100 years? And if we get this concept of failing and it's okay and normalizing some of the things that we celebrate in this group, how will we be as a society? And that's one of the reasons I really believe in what we're doing here. So I'm excited to introduce our first of 4 speakers. This guy grew up in New Jersey. He was a a accordion prodigy. So I've decided, I know he played the accordion. You can ask him if he was a prodigy. He got a full scholarship to BU. He showed up. He spent a semester there and dropped out. He got into helping to organize, and so didn't finish his college degree initially. He did go and work for an MIT startup, Raytheon. He spray painted the radar machines that probably had something to do with MX missiles. He then went on to be a probation officer, and he loved helping young people make good decisions and supporting them. And a lot of young people were throwing rocks and breaking the windows of the second oldest home in Massachusetts. So the guy loves history, and he offered to live in there. And he lived in this like 1,000 square foot home from the 1600s for 5 years. His first son was born around then, or maybe in there. You can ask him. I'm not totally sure. So this guy loved Dorchester. And in 1979, he noticed that Dorchester was becoming the arson capital of Boston. And there were 10 docs that lived right in Codman Square who had practices, who all left. And there was one remaining doctor. And there was this one beautiful building, which Rose Kennedy would study at. It was a library that was vacant. And he said, let's do something with it. And he created a health center in that space. And that health center today is the largest employer in Dorchester. That health center today sees 125,000 patients a year. That health center today has become a model around the world in Vietnam and Northern Ireland and Kosovo. And just last week, Malaysia invited the founder, Bill, to go give advice on how to use a health center to build community. He's on 14 boards. 14 people who've worked for him, or 18 people who've worked for him, are now CEOs of nonprofits in the area. He's on the board. This college dropout, who later went and got a degree, is the chairman of the board of Bunker Hill Community College. And he's going to tell you about his epic fail trying to run for mayor. Ladies and gentlemen, one of my favorite people in the whole wide world, Bill Walczak.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John. Actually, I want to start off with a non-failure story because I was trying to figure out, like, what kind of connection. I have a bachelor's degree in history from UMass Boston. That's all I have. And I was trying to think, what's my connection to MIT, right? And I realized, so I was looking at my calendar this morning, and I realized that 5 years ago today, I presided over a wedding ceremony in MIT Media Lab. It's a weird story because you're not supposed to do that. And if the CEO was here, he'd probably say, "Hey, arrest this guy." But anyway, just want to tell you that there's a couple, the woman of which graduated from MIT. They were from the Netherlands. They were Dutch, and they came. And I have a little cottage on my property in Dorchester that I rent out to a professor from UMass Boston. During the year, but in the summertime, I rent it out. So they rented it for the summer because they wanted to come to America. They wanted to work here. They were involved in game technology. Anyway, so they find out, they decide they're going to get married, and they realize that in Massachusetts, anybody can get a license for one day to say a wedding. So they said, well, would you be willing to marry us? And I said, yeah, why not? Why not? So and they said, oh, we're going to get married at the MIT Media Lab. What they didn't tell me was that they didn't ask anybody permission to get married in the MIT Media Lab. So there were all these Dutch people that came in for the wedding, and they said, oh, we're going to go. And I said, well, where in the Media Lab? And they said, we're going to look for a place when we get there. And so we all walk into this thing, and we went up to the 3rd floor, and there was a little tiny table that was in the corner, and there was hardly anybody there. She said, this is perfect, do it. They were both goth people, by the way. It was an interesting wedding. But anyway, so we went over there, and I did the wedding ceremony while waiting for the police to come and chase us away. But I mentioned something about how the Dutch brought civil unions, civil marriage to America. And also that Massachusetts was the place where gay marriage was legalized, and I quoted from Margaret Marshall's decision on that. And then they presented the rings, which had dragons on them, and they exchanged rings, and then we left. And I was thinking, wow, this is really weird. It's amazing we didn't get arrested. But anyway, that's my MIT connection. But But my failure story is one of, as John mentioned, actually my other MIT connection is John Werner. My failure story is kind of interesting. So I'm a baby boomer, right? And baby boomers kind of ruin the world. But when we were younger, we really thought we were going to change the world. And I was involved in civil rights. I was involved in anti-Vietnam War activities. And my goal in life was to change the world. And I'm actually a person who kind of lived up to that for the most part, because I get joy out of trying to help people and all that. Well, anyway, so when I was 20 years old, I was at a meeting in Codman Square. Oh, so actually, it starts a little earlier. How I wound up here from New Jersey. How I wound up in Dorchester from New Jersey. So I come up here and decided that I was going to hitchhike down to Cape Cod to see what Cape Cod looked like on 1 September, right after I got here. And I decided that. I went up hitchhiking down there. I never saw the water, but I wound up hitchhiking back. And while I was hitchhiking back, a car pulled over and got in the car. And the woman that was in the car, I married 6 months later. It's not a thing that happens very often then, and certainly probably doesn't happen now. But anyway, she was moving into an apartment. I had nothing to do. I was looking to meet locals. And so I helped her, moved into the apartment. She invited me back 3 weeks later, and we wound up dating. At that point, because I got involved in the United Farm Workers Union and Cesar Chavez and the lettuce boycott, our dates were going out to the A&P stores and handing out flyers urging people not to buy lettuce. And then in the winter, just coming into the winter, the organizers asked anybody wanted to go out to Denver to help organize the lettuce boycott out there. So I said, yeah, absolutely, I'm done with school, just done. And my girlfriend said, I'll go with you. And I said, well, all right, we have to get married then. So that's why we got married, because we were both Catholics, and I would kill my children if they did that. Nonetheless, we wound up going out to Denver and came back, and she was from Dorchester. That's where she was from. So we wind up moving into an apartment in Codman Square, Dorchester. Now, I'm wearing a tie here that's kind of important because it's a transit tie of Boston, and all transit ties of Boston, if you are going to show Dorchester on it. So this is kind of my life has been, since coming up here, is on this tie. But also MIT is on this tie, so just so you know. I bought it in New York, of all places. Anyway, so I wound up, going to community meetings, because I was actually, as John mentioned, I was working as a spray painter. And it was a boring job. So I wound up going to community meetings because I'm kind of a community activist type. And at one of the meetings, the city announced that this library building was going to close, and the place panicked, the neighborhood panicked. Why? Because in those days, everybody was moving out of the city of Boston, and houses became worthless. I mean, literally worthless. I could have bought houses for $1,000 in those days because there was just a far surplus of housing. And so when the library was going to be was going to be vacated by the city, it was a beautiful building in the middle of the square, and everybody said, oh, it's going to burn. We got to put something in there. And I had heard about these health centers, so I asked questions about, well, what about these health centers? Maybe we could put a health center in there. So I was chosen to be the chair of the committee to start a health center. And so at age 20, I wound up becoming the president of the board of a non-existent health center that wound up fighting with the Kevin White administration, who was mayor at the time, over the use of the building. And eventually we got permission. In 1979, we opened up our doors. And because I'd been there a long time and we didn't really have any money, I left the job that I had as a probation officer, where I had some of the Wahlbergs on probation, by the way. And wound up becoming the director of the health center. I thought I'd stay there for 6 months and then find somebody that really knew healthcare, but I wound up staying for 36 years. One of the things that I realized, and probably the most value that I brought to the organization, was the fact that I was not trained to be in healthcare. I had nothing to do with healthcare. I didn't use healthcare, but here I am running a health center. And so I realized really early that healthcare was not the most important thing facing this really low-income, decaying community of Codman Square. It was not the thing that was causing the problems there. The problems were drugs, violence, arson, very poor schools, all that kind of stuff. And what's a health center supposed to do about that? So as a result, I started changing the definition of healthcare. So although we had doctors and all that, and we were providing medical care, we also wound up helping to start 2 schools. One charter school, it's called Codman Academy, which is actually the model for the Chan Zuckerberg initiative out in East Palo Alto for anybody who's been out in that area. And another school is the Edward Kennedy Health Careers Academy, all around the idea that, I'd go to these conferences and people would say, we need more people of color, and more linguistic minorities and as health professionals. But nobody had an idea what to do about it. And a lot of times, the education is so poor that, people can't get those jobs because they're not going to be able to do the kind of work when they get into college. So we said, well, let's start at high schools then. Let's start schools where kids are going to learn about healthcare and be able to get into those kind of positions. So I wound up doing that. I wound up, helping to start a nonprofit grocery store because food was a big issue, access to healthy food. A nonprofit fitness center for women and children. A lot of different outreach work. Community organizing, all sorts of different things that came out of that health center. So it became a real community building experience rather than just a medical facility. And it became, over my first 20 years there, I was a go-to guy from the media, right? So, I was in hundreds of articles, Walczak says this about it, Walczak says that. And then in 2013, Tom Menino, the then mayor for life. He had been there for 20 years. Nobody knew whether he was sick, but he decided he wasn't going to run for office. And he decided late, so there was only 6 months between when he came out and said he wasn't going to run for mayor and when the election was going to be held. And I had always thought, politics is really important to poor people. If you are in a poor neighborhood and you have a lousy school system, you're not going to go anywhere. If the police are corrupt, it's not going to help. And so I always thought that, God, we have to do something about the political system. We have to change it, we have to reform it, and we have to aim it towards helping low-income people in Boston, and especially in Dorchester, where I live. And so I thought about, maybe I should run for mayor. Maybe I should run and put my name out there. And so I called a group of people together, and I said, well, really unlikely candidate. I'd been the CEO of healthcare organizations at that point for like 40 years. And, should I run for mayor? And they all thought, well, you got ideas. Why don't we run an issues campaign and see how far that would go? And, let's try to put somebody into the mayor's office that's going to make some real reforms happen and help low-income people. So I announced, decided, what the heck? It's only 6 months. You could do anything for 6 months, right? 6 months, goes by like that. And I got some really good publicity. It was the front page of the Globe on a Sunday was my announcement. The people were saying, "Wow, look at this guy. He's an unusual kind of candidate." I wound up coming out against the casino, which got me some publicity and all that. And that worked out really well for about 2 weeks. And then things really went south because I had to run a campaign, right? I needed a campaign manager. I needed people that were going to work for me. I needed to raise tons of money for this type of thing. And that, so as the head of a health center, if I needed to employ somebody, I would call a headhunter and say, find me a medical director, find me this. The campaign world is totally different. You're looking at people who kind of are itinerant. They go from place to place to place doing campaigns and stuff like that. And so finding people was really difficult. And at the same time, there was a U.S. Senate race going on, so it became almost impossible. So I wound up with, really poor staff on for my candidacy, which made it really difficult to do it. I found that the media treats you really, really different when all of a sudden you're running for office. It's like when I was talking about healthcare or public health or something like that, they always came to me and asked for comments. But this time they're trying to find something bad about me. There's like asking questions to try to position me on answers and stuff like that. I wound up going to these things where complex issues would be brought up and you'd have 45 seconds to give an answer. 45 seconds. It's like, how do you give an answer in 45 seconds? And so, but that's the kind of thing that politicians do. They learn how to do, pithy little remarks and, get the headlines off of that kind of thing. The other thing that happened to me was that in my community, my reputation went down because all of a sudden I was a politician. So it didn't matter that I was the head of a health center or whatever. I remember I was part of a group that was going to help try to fix the MBTA, which that group really needs to come back together. But try to fix the MBTA, and so I went to the meeting. They said, "Bill, we don't want you anymore in here because now you're running for office." And I'm like, "Well, wait a second. I still care about the MBTA." And I said, "No, Bill, you're done. Okay?" Well, it's like, come back after the campaign. It was raising money. Holy crap! I spent 5 hours a day calling people up and begging for the maximum of $500. And I was able to raise about $700,000. Meaningless. It was meaningless. The winner, who was Marty Walsh, wound up raising like $6 million. And because he was the union candidate, and the unions were able to give $14,500 per local, and my maximum was $500 for campaigns. But so anyway, so it became really, really difficult to build that campaign. So. And so far as people knowing me, which I thought was going to be a big thing because I was quoted in the Globe a lot, forget it. People don't pay attention, period. But, I wound up, going to places and, it's like people say, "Who are you again? Where are you from?" That kind of thing. And it became really, really difficult unless you had a ton of money to be able to put your name out there, get on television, all that kind of stuff. So I went down in flames. Gone. It was kind of embarrassing, but I kind of figured that I was going to go down because I knew, it's just you read the tea leaves, right? You go into different things. The media is playing up certain candidates. They tier you. That's the other thing that they do. It's based on how much money you raise. So if you raise a lot of money, you're in tier 1. If you raise a medium amount, you're in tier 2. And if you don't raise a lot of money at all, you're in tier 3. So and they pay attention to the tier 1 people. And so, that was, so I went down in flames, and it was okay. I kind of figured that it was, I was a long shot. But what was really disappointing for me, was the fact that my family and my supporters were really devastated by this. And I felt really bad about that. I mean, it was like, oh man, I felt that I let them down, It was like, what a terrible thing to do, to your friends and your family. My wife was devastated. She said, "I thought you were going to win." I said, "Well, I should have told you." It was really remote from the beginning, but boy, I tell you, as it went along, it got remoter. So the other thing was, after the election in September 2013, my health went downhill. It winds up that when you're running for office, first of all, you look great because you forget to eat. So your weight goes down, all that. But the other thing is you're all pumped up on adrenaline, like continuously pumped up on adrenaline. And then all of a sudden you're not campaigning anymore. That adrenaline goes by, and whatever problem you had before comes back in a big time. So I felt really sick for like for 3 months after that election. And it was, it was awful. I thought, geez, maybe I was coming down with something, maybe I was getting a disease or something. But it wound up that it was just the adrenaline that was, disappeared, and my body came back to its normal decrepit state. But in any case, I went back to work. I was working, and that was fine. People kind of got used to the fact that I was, not running for office anymore. And I got to think about it quite a bit, afterwards. And I realized that although, it was a tough thing to do, really difficult thing to do, I really enjoyed the campaigning part of it because I'm a people person. I get my energy from people. And so being able to go around the city and talk to people, especially people that were energized by being in the city of Boston, wanting to fix things and all that, was a great experience. I went to parts of the city I didn't know existed. There's a great place right at the tip of East Boston. I didn't know existed. It has all this artwork and stuff like that over there. It's just, just wonderful places that I learned all about. And that was the great part about it. But frankly, you get tired by doing stuff like that. I'm 68 years old now, and I've spent 50 years kind of in the work world, 50 years. 49 and a half of those years have been spent in mostly in human services and doing stuff like that. And 1/2 of 1 year was spent in being a politician. 1/2 of 1 year. If you look at my Wikipedia page, Bill Walczak, politician from Boston. I went to my 50th high school reunion 2 weeks ago, and I was introduced. Here's Bill Walczak. He's a politician from Boston, right? It's awful, to think that someday, when I die, my obituary is going to go, Bill Walczak, failed politician, dies. So it's like, oh my God. But my life has gone on. Went back to work. I've retired 3 years ago, and I've spent most of my time. I'm on 14 boards, as mentioned. It's like crazy. Everybody says it's nuts, but I enjoy. They're all boards that I don't get paid for, but they're all boards that are all about trying to help the city of Boston or do something like nonprofit grocery stores and stuff like that. I find, I also write a column for the Dorchester Reporter, which is, basically all the things that kind of pissed me off when I was, running these institutions and all that about, about Boston, about how things happen in Boston. I get to write about stuff like that because I'm retired and they can't do anything to me anymore. But the other thing that happened and I'll close with this, last night. Was it last night? Yes. Last night was the 25th Men of Boston Cook for Women's Health. That was for the Codman Square Health Center, which is the place I started and ran for 36 years. They had this great event. I knew, it's one of the things to go to one of those kind of events, and I kind of know everybody. And this guy comes up to me and he says, hey, are you going to run again? You going to run again? And I said, no effing way. So that's my failure story.
Thank you, Bill. Bill Walczak, everyone. As you can tell, Bill's pretty cool. That hat is also pretty cool. And when we were talking before the event started, he let me know that he also plays accordion in a band, and they're called the Savin Hillbillies, which might be my favorite band name. So you can find them on the internet and find out when they're playing next. Now, politics sounds kind of grim, but I'm sure that Bill would be on my side when I want to draw attention to your fact that the midterms are coming up. That's right, it's the boring election. And it's really important to vote, and MIT can help you do that. If you go to mit.turbovote.org, MIT can help you find out how to register. The last day you can register is October 29th. I became a citizen in 2020 and got to vote for the first time, and it felt amazing. Oh, thank you. It was just a lot of paperwork, but it felt great. But MIT Turbo Vote reminded me when I moved house in the past year to vote in my local elections. And so there's a bunch of stuff coming up in November, not just your representative in Congress, but the governor of Massachusetts. So if you're eligible to vote, please go to mitturbovote.org. Off my soapbox. Our next speaker is, I feel like a business revolutionary is maybe what I would call her. She's a local business leader. 30 years ago, she founded the Hollister Group, and she's an all-round wonderful human being. Please join me in welcoming Kip Hollister.
So, my boss calls me into his office, and he says, "What are these carpet samples? I found them in your top right-hand drawer." I look at him and I say, "They're carpet samples from my new office space. I'm starting my own business." He says, "You're fired." I'm only 25 years old, almost 26. I feel guilty, I feel horrible. The good news is I have a business partner. So I call my business partner and I say, "Guess what? I just got fired. And it means we can start earlier, in September." Silence on the other end of the line. "Kip, don't know how to say this to you. I can't continue. with our agreement. I'm like, what? Wait a minute. You talked me into this. I'm stupid. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not enough. I can't go through this alone. And actually, I really couldn't go through it alone. You know why? Because in 1988, a woman could not get a business loan by herself. She had to have it co-signed by a man. Now, if that doesn't feel like failure, I don't know what does. So luckily, he agreed to co-sign a loan for me. Very small amount, had to pay it back within a year. So, Hollister was born in September of 1988. Next year, I get married. Within the next 2 years, 2 children, 13 months apart, and we move into gorgeous new office space. And those of you who have been in business for 3 decades, you know that there are 3 recessions that we have suffered through, plus a global pandemic. And so the recession hits, right when we're moving into new office space. Now, I don't have any female mentors, right? I'm a woman entrepreneur and a mom at this point, and a house in Charlestown. We get through that recession. The second recession, dire straits. Let me give you context. The second recession, we drop revenues $10 million. The bank shut off our line, so it froze. My contract CFO and a turnaround consultant are looking at me and my husband, who came into the business 6 years earlier, saying, there's only one choice, bankruptcy. I'm like, no way. So they march me over to 60 State Street. We go to a bankruptcy attorney. We walk out. My husband, I will never forget, we had a red Jeep. He goes to the red Jeep. I say, I'm going back in to face all of our staff. We also agreed with our 4 children at this point that it was time for one of us to be home, and Warren gracefully agreed it should be him, and then I was going to try to working out this company. March back into my company, tears rolling down my cheeks, looking at my staff, pulling them together, saying, are you worth my home equity line? Because that's what we're going to do. And everyone said, we're all in. Now, there was a lot of stress on me. I felt horrible as a leader. I felt like a total failure. I felt like I had driven this company into the ground, and I had to face myself. So I started to be one of those hard-driving leaders, right? I was very demanding. The environment was one that was not so gentle. And it was all because I was so afraid. I was so afraid of failing. And I also was trying to protect my family. And so when we were moving into this third recession, I had a wake-up call, and I said, something has to be different. Because here's what I was doing. I was lying to myself. And let me describe what that looks like. Walking through my bullpen at 75 State Street, a male manager says, Kip, you cutting out early? Now, I don't know. First of all, I'm the boss. I'm not sure if that had been a male manager, if he would have said that to him. So what I did is I lied. I was going to Chase's football game, but I said, I have off-site meetings. Now that tore at my insides because I claimed to be authentic. And here I was being incredibly inauthentic. So here we are in the third recession now. And I'm stepping back and I'm saying we got to do things differently. And so we started this cultures division, which was all about building personal professional development for our core staff and really learning what self-awareness is, learning what authentic communication is, and it was amazing. And then we took it out to our clients. And so here I was, having this new idea. I'm coming into my own from failing and realizing, wow, I can now start working on being more authentic and clean up my act. And so I'm in this, I fly out because I'm asked to speak now on whole self at work, and I'm flying out to Phoenix, Arizona, and about to facilitate in the morning session, and I get a call from my husband, and he says, we're losing him. I'm like, losing him? What are you talking about? And he's like, Chase, our 23-year-old son, who's a junior at Trinity College. I'm like, ha. And he said, no, true. So I'm in shock. And I go to the airport. There are no planes available. Luckily, a dear friend gets me on a private plane, thank God, because I was alone and I could be in the clouds with my son. And here I am, meditating, praying, calling in all my angels, like, give me help. And all of a sudden, I hear this song come, Teach Your Children, which was a song I sang to Chase so much, tickling him to sleep. And I came out of that. I look out, I'm with the clouds, I'm with my son. I get a text from my husband. He's gone. Just like that. My life changed. So what is life about? What matters? You talk about failure, I talk about failure. Here I am. So I get off that private plane, and, you know, thankfully I have these 3 beautiful daughters and my husband, and we spend time together with Chase. And we're there, and I realize that life is about living in the now. And I wasn't doing it. I wasn't doing it totally. I thought I was. So I spent 2 months grieving, 2 months in my piano room, 2 months meditating, 2 months calling in a tribe of healers, because I didn't want to be defined as that woman who lost her son. I also needed to step back foot in my company at 75 State Street. How the hell am I going to do that? I didn't know. But here's what I do know. Our culture doesn't know how to deal with grief. We don't know how to lean in, how to be with, how to embrace self and others. And so I knew that I had to go back in the firm, and I said, how do I do it? My 2 daughters are in the company. So 2 months in, I thought, we're going to write the narrative. We're going to write the narrative of what this looks like. So I called a meeting. I'm sure everyone was freaked out. It's like, oh no, Kip's coming in. And I walk in the front door, and we are in the bullpen, and I just start telling stories about Chase. You know, he had interned at Hollister, so many people knew him. And all of a sudden, there was a little bit of levity, right? We cried. There was a lot of discomfort in the beginning. But what I realized is that we created this space, this psychological safety that is so needed in companies right now. And through that, people were able to breathe. And I shared the picture of Chase that was at his memorial in our backyard with 700 people, which is the beautiful soul of a human. And I invited everybody to bring his spirit into our company so that we could pivot and start leading with love and kindness over anger and scarcity. And actually, to this day, people have his card on their desk, and they bring him in, as well as his bracelets. A year later, I'm in New York, and I'm at a CEO peer group, which I kind of didn't want to go to, but I said, you know what, just go. It's Chase's Angelversary. It's November 12th. And I show up, and she says, bring something to wear for a photo shoot. So I immediately kind of think, oh, power suit, CEO. Okay, I'm going to bring my red jacket, get a great photo for my website. Well, we show up. It was not that kind of a photo shoot. There was a photographer there who said, so we're going to have each of you dance. Okay, I don't dance. The negative voices were going crazy in my mind that I'm unworthy, I can't do this, I'm not enough. The imposter self felt like I had to get out of there. And I went, 8 of 9 people, and I got up and I started to dance. We got to choose our song. I chose Sarah McLachlan, The Arms of an Angel, and Bonnie Raitt, Angel from Montgomery. And so, I like dance like this. I'm not great at all. And so then I decided, the facilitator brought over a red rose that she had brought me for Chase's anniversary. She knew it was his day. And then I started to click in. And I started to dance and get in flow with my son. And there was this energy that came. And I then knew what this photo shoot was all about. It was about finding who you really are. It's who we are as human beings rather than human doers. And all of the sudden, my past and all of the failures and even the cultures group and everything was kind of coming into fruition in that moment, like, oh my gosh, this is what I have access to now. And so here I am, and I'm thinking about this, and I'm saying that all of us have stories. All of us have failures. All of us have pain and grief. And it's a choice to listen to the negative voices, I call them imposter voices, or to choose to surrender, to be vulnerable, to be alive. And in that moment after that dance, I chose to say, I'm giving it up. I'm taking my mask off. I am boldly stepping in. I'm not dimming my light. I want to serve humanity in a new way, and I want this in companies so that they get to thrive. And it was an awakening for me. And one of my favorite quotes from Ernest Hemingway is, "We are stronger in our broken places." And I really felt that, and I feel that. And the invitation is just like, oh my gosh, you know, we have these imposter voices, and I still have them, but I get to put them on a shelf, and I get to dance with them. I get to dance with them like I did that day, you know, in that photo shoot. And also, when I think about coming from 1988, you know, when a woman couldn't get a loan, to today, it's quite remarkable how this climate has changed and the opportunity we all have to open our hearts, minds, and souls and be fully human together. Thank you.
Kip Hollister, everyone. Kip, thank you so much for sharing your beautiful story and for sharing your memories of Chase. We have reached the audience participation part of the evening. It is too late, you can't leave. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to play a little game. We like to do this at Fail just to sort of see how many of us have some shared experiences. So I'm going to read out some fails, and if you have experienced this yourself, I want you to stand up. And then if I read the next one and that's not you, you can sit down and then you can stand back up again. I'm going to be standing the whole time, so you can assume that I've done all of these, or I can also give a wave for the ones that are particularly specific to me. Okay, so please join me in standing if you have ever failed an exam. Hey, friends. Me too. Please stand if you have ever had a paper rejected. Yeah. Me too. Did you know you can get papers rejected in the arts? You can. Stand up if you have ever accidentally hit reply all. Stay standing if you've hit reply all and it really mattered. Stand up if you've ever failed a driving test. Driving test. My next one is stay standing if you've ever failed 2 driving tests. Stand up if you've ever failed 4 driving tests and had to move to a different country where the driving test is easier in order to get the license. Just me? Thank you. I swear I'm safe. I just get very nervous under pressure. Stand up if you've ever applied for a job and you didn't get it. Stand up if you ever got fired. I've done both of those, just to point out, also me. Okay, here's my last one. Stand up if you've ever been on Zoom and you're in a meeting and you're not really paying attention, and then someone says, so what's your opinion? And you go, oh. Yay. We're such good friends. Thank you so much for doing that with us. Our next speaker is a former Army officer. She spent 3 years on the faculty at West Point, and she is also the director of libraries for MIT. Please welcome Chris Berg.
So thank you. So before I tell you one particular story of one of several failures, I was standing almost the entire time just now, it is important, I think, that I explain to you that my relationship with failure, my attitude towards failure, was absolutely formed during the 10 years that I spent in the US Army. So I went to college on an ROTC scholarship. So that meant that my first job out of the Army was as an active duty second lieutenant in the Army. And anyone here who has any experience with the military, either personally or through family and friends, probably knows that the military is sort of notorious for taking sort of bright-eyed, fresh-faced college graduates with very little experience and giving them a whole lot of responsibility right away. Responsibility for people and things and really important missions. And that's absolutely what happened to me. So my first job in the Army was in Germany towards the end of the Cold War. And I was given responsibility for logistics and maintenance for a large communications battalion that had responsibility for communications all across southern Germany. Again, towards the end of the Cold War. Some of the parts of that mission and the things that I did, I wasn't allowed to talk about. Probably still am not allowed to talk about, I'm not really sure. So the stakes were high. Like, this was really important. And I really learned that failure was not an option, which is actually something that the military, it's kind of part of the ethos and the culture, right? The stakes are really high. In battle, obviously, bad ideas, ideas that fail, are lethal. People die. Your brothers and sisters in arms are depending on you, especially as a leader. And so you really can't fail. And that literally got drilled into me in those 10 years in the Army. And in some ways, it helped. I developed what I think was a fairly healthy fear of failure. And that drove much of my success in the Army. So I did well as a logistics and maintenance officer. I got selected to command a company. I then got selected to go teach at West Point. And I was actually in line to be promoted to major when I decided I was kind of done with the military thing and wanted to go back to school. So I left the Army and I went to Stanford and enrolled in a PhD program in sociology. I also, as soon as I got there, I don't know if there are any grad students in the audience, but grad student stipends aren't great. So I got a part-time job to supplement that stipend. And I got that part-time job in the Stanford libraries in a data services unit. Now, I had just spent 10 years in the Army. I was an officer. I had commanded a company. And now I'm doing this part-time job as a student worker in a library. I couldn't help myself. I started to lead. I started to fill in the sort of gaps in that unit with ideas and plans and ways we could change things. And I was fortunate enough that my boss kind of let me run with it. So what happened then is that by the time I finished my PhD, the Stanford libraries asked me to take a real job in the libraries, and they offered me a job as a social science librarian. So that's where my library career started. And it turns out that the director of the Stanford libraries had also spent some time in the Army. And so we kind of bonded on that, and I think he really respected that part of my background. So I started a job in the libraries as a social science librarian. That lasted for a couple of years, and then the director asked me to do a different job and to take over responsibility for communications for the libraries and what was at the time a really small, new kind of thing, the library website. So I did that, and that grew, and then he asked me to take another promotion, and then another promotion, and eventually he promotes me to be an associate director of the Stanford libraries, where I ended up with responsibility for the special collections, the a bunch of branch libraries, all of the social science and humanities librarians, and even the data unit that I started at as a grad student. So this was a great job. I loved it. I'm doing well. Everything's clicking. It's the right job for me, and I'm really, by this time I've decided, okay, libraries might be my thing. And all is clicking well. And then the boss, the director, decides that it's time for the Stanford libraries to start a digital scholarship unit. And he's not really sure how it should be formed and what should happen, so he turns to me and one of my peers, another associate director, and he asks us to come up with the plan. He asked us to work together and make a proposal for what a digital scholarship unit in the libraries would look like. And I'm super excited about this. This is like a big responsibility. It's going to be like the next phase of growth for the Stanford libraries. It's a big deal, and I get to work on it. So my colleague Rich and I sit down and start to try and figure out what kind of proposal we're going to come up with. And it becomes clear really, really quickly that we are not going to be able to work together on this. Now, my colleague Rich so I had responsibility for all the disciplinary librarians. My colleague Rich was in the technical part of the libraries. And so he had web developers and software engineers and all the folks who could build technical things and infrastructure, and I had the disciplinary expertise. Well, as you might guess, he thought the unit should live in his division. I thought the unit should live in my division, and we could not agree. And I'd worked with Rich for years by now, and we'd gotten along really well. So that was the first failure. Like, how could I not get him to see my point of view? And how could we not come to some compromise? But we just couldn't. So that was hard. I really had this self-image that I was someone who could collaborate and could do that, and it didn't work. So Rich and I go our separate ways and decide to come up with 2 separate plans and present them to the boss. So Rich works on his plan. I'm working hard on my plan. I get some of my staff, some of these disciplinary experts to help me. We develop a slide deck. We marshal all the evidence, and it was a great slide deck. Lots of good quotes. And then the day comes, and the director calls a meeting. I think it was a 9 o'clock in the morning meeting in the director's conference room, big, sort of real official looking wooden table. He's sitting, the director's at one end, Rich and I are at the other, and our peers are sitting in the middle. The other associate directors who weren't pitching ideas were sitting in the middle and sitting in judgment. And Rich presents his idea. It's not a bad idea, if I'm honest. I present mine. I, of course, think it's the better idea. Certainly, it was the better slide deck. And we both sit down. There's a little bit of discussion. And then the director, this guy who has loved every idea I have come to him with for 10 years now, and who has promoted me through the libraries consistently, chose Rich's plan. I literally thought I hadn't heard him right when he said it. I could feel it in my body, like this isn't happening. Like, I was devastated, I was embarrassed. I felt like, not just that my plan had failed, but that I had failed. I had somehow not come up with a good enough plan, or I had not presented it well enough, or the boss had lost confidence in me. He picked the other plan, I lost. I didn't win, I failed. Remember, my leadership was forged in an environment where failure was not an option, where the wrong plan gets people killed. I was devastated. And it showed. I took it personally. I took it really personally. And for weeks afterwards, I was not myself at work. So much so that, people asked me about it. My boss, the director, asked me about it. He couldn't really understand why I was taking it so personally. And actually, for a little bit, I felt like, wow, if he didn't like that idea, that means he's lost confidence in me. I guess I better look for a new job. I'm about to get fired. That was not the case. And with some amount of time and perspective, I came to understand that we actually did both present good plans. He had to pick one, and the one that he picked was the one he thought was right for that moment. And it didn't mean that my plan was a failure. It certainly didn't mean I was a failure, even though it felt that way. And it felt that way for a while, then it faded. Then as that unit actually got formed, and some of the disciplinary experts, by the way, who had reported to me, the data services unit, where I started my career, got moved into that unit and now reported to Rich. So I lost some of what I thought was mine. So that pain of not having my idea get picked stuck with me. But it lessened over time, and eventually I came up with some other good ideas, and they were accepted, and I had some successes, some continued success. And then, fast forward a few years, I get the extraordinary opportunity to come to MIT and be the director of the libraries, not the associate director. And it didn't take long before I had a whole nother level of learning from that experience. Because I have an amazing staff. I have an amazing set of associate directors and department heads and other staff who come to me with good ideas all the time. And I can't say yes to all of them. I can't say yes to all of them. Saying no to an idea doesn't mean it's a bad idea. Having your idea not take off at that moment, I learned isn't a failure. It may just be that the time's not right. But I also learned, and this is my favorite part of this story for me, I think it made me a better leader, because I now know that it might feel that way to someone. If I don't pick their idea, if I say, nope, we're not going to do that, I need to explain why. I need to provide some context. I need to help them understand it didn't mean it's a failure. It didn't mean that it was a bad idea or that they are a failure, and that many, many ideas can exist, and sometimes the leader just has to choose one and make it work. The final thing I want to say about what I've learned from that story is that in some ways, I now see sort of the irony of me thinking that there are winners and losers and good ideas and bad ideas, and the ideas that don't get picked are bad and wrong and failures. I have responsibility as a director of libraries for stewarding a vast collection of resources and scholarly outputs that sort of make up the scholarly record and our cultural heritage. And that collection is full of good ideas, some of which have been replaced by better ideas, but they still are an important part of what we now know and learn from as individuals and as a society. So part of what I've learned is that every idea deserves a hearing and deserves to be out there. And if you have an idea, that's good. Thanks very much.
Chris Berg, everyone. As a bona fide library fangirl, I was really excited to hear that story, so thank you so much. I want to remind you of the QR codes up on either side of the room. You can scan those to submit questions for any of our speakers or a general question to all of them for the Q&A portion, which is coming up after our final speaker. Our final speaker has been on the faculty of MIT since 1980, but you know him as MIT's 17th president. Please join me in welcoming President Raphael Reif.
Thank you. Two quick questions before I start. How many of you are grad students? And how many of you are international grad students? Well, so some of you may relate to my little story. Let me start by saying that I haven't talked about my failures in about 70 years. So this is my first time I'm doing it, so I may actually fail at doing it, so we'll see. Going back to my years in Venezuela, I had my undergraduate degree in electrical engineering, and I tried to figure out what to do with it. I needed a job. I needed to make a living. I find a job working for a company, doing some stuff that didn't appear that interesting. I luckily find a job being kind of, the title is instructor at the university, and I tried that. And that really felt like a lot of fun, talking to students, dealing with them, handling their kinds of questions, being quick on my feet, trying to answer everything. That was fun. So I thought this is really what I wanted to do. But in countries like Venezuela, and those of you who come from other countries know that in many places, jobs are being really set up in a way that you have to have some people you know, and some influence, some way of getting access to those opportunities. And I didn't know anybody, so I was an absolute nobody. So I thought that I have to really earn it the best way I can. And I figured if I go to the US and I get a PhD, that will give me an edge up over everybody else, or most everybody else, and be able to secure a job at the university. So I found my way to the US Embassy. There was no internet back then, to look at universities and find out where I could go. To make a long story short, looking at course materials and so forth, I chose to apply to Stanford, Caltech, and Berkeley. Not MIT, because you have a reputation. You're tough, you're rigorous. There is all this snow in winter. That wasn't for me. So California felt like something I could handle. So I applied to those 3 schools. So Berkeley replied, thanks, but no thanks. Berkeley, are you listening to me? Caltech replied, thanks, but no thanks. Stanford said yes. Stanford, thank you. So there I went. Just 2 problems. I didn't speak much English, but I figured it has been done before. I mean, I'm not a pioneer here, so that should be okay. I should be able to handle that. So I come to America, don't speak much of the language. Showed up on a weekend in the Palo Alto area, showed up on a Saturday, look for an inexpensive hotel to spend the night, spend Sunday looking for a place to live. Monday, I go to Stanford to say I arrived, I'm here, so what do I do next? There is nobody at Stanford. I walk around, nobody, not a soul. It was Labor Day. I didn't know. I mean, what is Labor Day? There is no Labor Day in Venezuela, so that was a waste. Eventually, I found my way to an office and so forth. I knew that things were not going to be easy when I realized that the place is so spacious that you have to have a bike to go from one place to the other. I grew up in a city. I don't know about bikes. I've never been in a bike. So off I go and get a bike and learn how to drive it, how to ride it, and fail a few times and scrap some clothes that I didn't have, but that's the way it was. On my first day at class, it rained, and I go to my first class, and I had to apply the brakes because there was this car coming, and well, what do I know? The brakes were wet. So I just simply went in, hit the car, fell off, broke my glasses. That was my first day. So I knew that things were going to be a little complicated. But okay, you recover from that, no big deal. You get new glasses, you miss a few classes, that's okay. Classes were horrible because I didn't know what the instructor was talking about in any of my classes. I didn't have the right preparation. For those of you who have a background on physics or electrical engineering know that in the 70s, you were already into solid state. Venezuela, we were still into vacuum tubes, if you know enough of the history of electronics. So I had no clue of what anybody was talking about here. I also did not understand English. So I still have my class notes in which I wrote what the instructor said in class in the way I heard it phonetically in Spanish. So my notes were in phonetics of what you were saying, but I didn't know what on earth you were saying. And then I looked into a dictionary to figure out what on earth this fellow said in class. So it was pretty hard, but I was here I was in the US, I was at Stanford, I was trying to get a PhD. You know, you have to get a master's first, and that's at Stanford is 3/4, is one, at least in the department that I was. But I noticed the classes were very interactive. The students were eager to be noticed, and the professors were eager to know the students. So there was lots of questions and answers and professors interacting and stuff. And there is this either minor thing that the qualifying exam for a PhD were in January, once a year. So this is October, we start classes, I don't know what's going on. I know that I have to prepare for January. I know that everybody wants professors to notice you, and I had no idea how to be noticed because I didn't know what's going on. I did not know anybody. Nobody would talk to me because I wouldn't know how to talk to anybody. But I was determined to be noticed. So, you know, at home, I tried to advance and read the material ahead of the class so that I could at least try to catch something of the class. And I thought, I know I'm going to be noticed. I'm going to just study ahead and prepare a question that I will ask in question, the professor answers and will notice me, so that I'm not just a face there that nobody, that seems to be somebody who doesn't say anything. So I did that, and I had my question prepared, and the class comes with that connects with that question, but the professor actually talks about the question. He answered my question. So that effort went to naught. I did that again like a week or two later, and then somebody else jumped ahead of me and asked the question, my same question, so at least I was onto something because that question was valid. Somebody else had it. So I had a little bit more self-confidence that I was onto something here. At the third try, and each of those tries take a lot of time for me to figure out the story, I had this question that I thought was excellent. When there came the right moment, I raised my hand, the professor looked at me and pointed to ask the question. I did. Everybody looked at me, he looked at me, and then he answered with a question. I didn't know what he said. So I was there standing, everybody looking at me, and I didn't know what to do. So, failure number one. I sat down and I felt like horrible. This was my chance to be noticed, and yes, I was noticed, like somebody who doesn't know what he's talking about. Well, that was my first experience. I can assure you that I didn't ask any question like for another 6 months or so. I mean, I was not going to try that again. Well, the qualification exams come in January. I didn't have much hope, but I had to try. I didn't even know how to prepare. I prepared a little that I started in the fall. To make a long story short, I failed. Out. Luckily, Stanford gives you 2 tries. So I had until the other January. So I finished my master's in the summer. And I think you can stay a little longer. You have to have some support and stuff, but that was taken care of. Somebody was helping me in the faculty, someone who believed in me for somehow. And you can, if you fail the second time, well, you can live with some consolation degree of some kind. I think it's an engineer. I forget exactly the title. So I thought of giving it a try, but I mean that was out of desperation. I really, on more than one occasion, I was really ready to quit. At least 3 times during that year because I just didn't think I had a shot. And by the way, when you don't speak the language, everybody looks smarter than you and feels smarter than you because at least they speak the language. I don't even know what they're saying. To make a long story short, I prepared, I worked my everything off, and on that following January, sheer luck, I passed the quals. That experience, that moment where I stood up and looked like a perfect fool, and that experience of failing miserably the first quals stayed with me during my stay at Stanford. So after I passed the quals, things went smoothly, although I wasn't believing it, but they went fine. I took less than 3 years to finish my thesis. So I was done, and I was packing and going back home because I had this job waiting for me. And then 2 professors, my advisor and a member of my thesis committee, asked me to stay to work for them. they knew that I was going to go back, but they didn't mind how much time I could give to them. And I remember thinking, why me? I'm the dumbest person here. I tell you sincerely, I thought that I was the dumbest person in the whole class, in the whole group. And I couldn't understand how these two guys would want me to work with them. I did go to work for one of them. My logic was this. I have a job waiting for me. I have a PhD from Stanford. I really think I have a good shot at keeping that job. And if I stay at Stanford 1 year doing something, whatever that is, I really secure that job. So I gotta do this, and Venezuela can wait another year. I did that. After that year, I was packing and leaving, and MIT, God bless their souls of everybody here, came after me. I did not know why. I learned much later that MIT called Stanford to say, we want somebody with this profile. And Stanford said, you gotta talk to this guy. But don't bother, he's going back to Venezuela. These people here are pretty stubborn and went after me brutally, and eventually I interviewed to get them off my back because I wanted the letters when I get for tenure. So I was just trying to be polite diplomatically. The bottom line is that I came and I loved what I saw, and I figured, well, let me give MIT 2 years, and then I really will get tenure in Venezuela. No chance that they'll quit on me if I have a PhD from Stanford. I broke in Stanford to forget MIT. Well, I never went back. But the point is, the lesson I tried to share is two things. Number one, that I failed miserably twice when I tried so hard not to fail, because I thought my future was in my hands there, and I could not let that go. Even though I overcame it, I still did not believe in myself. I mean, that's what I'm trying to say to you all. I did not believe in me, even though I overcame that. And it was only much later, when I was here and knew the story that happened and how people thought, I started gaining confidence. And this place is the place where I became the person that I am. Thank you, Stanford, for allowing me to come to the US. But the overcoming failure is not that simple. Even though I overcame it, it took me a while to realize that I actually did. Thank you for listening.
President Reif, everyone, thank you so much. One thing that really stuck out about the story was the quietness of Labor Day. When I first moved to the United States, I had a job in New York City, and I took the train in one day, and it was so quiet, which never happens in New York City. And I went to my office, and I let myself in, and there was nobody there, and it was President's Day. And everybody else took the day off, and I didn't even know it was happening. So I really relate to that moment in particular. So thank you so much. We're going to move to the Q&A portion of our event. Give us a moment to set up, and please keep submitting your questions through the QR codes on the slide. Thank you so much. I'd like to invite our speakers to come join me up on stage. Please welcome Bill Walczak, Kip Hollister, Chris Berg, and President Reif. Sorry, I need the code. I can't see it because it's in there. I'm going to write it down. That's okay. So then a classic fail. The iPad locked, and I did not have the code. So there we go. That's how we start. So thank you, everybody. Welcome to the Q&A portion of our event. I'm going to open up with a general question, which is, how do you deal with imposter syndrome, and does it ever go away? And President Reif, maybe I'll start with you.
Well, I kind of already described how I dealt with it. I think all you can do is just, I mean, in the case, in the way it happened to me, all I did is just try hard and hard and hard. But as I said, if you feel that way, you can overcome it. But if other events make you feel that way too, it's really tough to overcome. And that's why that was my situation. So.
Thank you. Kip, do you have any thoughts on imposter syndrome? I know this came up in your
Yeah,
talk.
sure. I could go on and on. So the great thing to know is that we all have thoughts, but you're not your thoughts. And so the imposter syndrome comes from this thing that we have going, which is negative self-talk, which then forms beliefs. And so it's pulling up, looking at all your belief systems and questioning them and asking, is this based in fact, right? Like your story was so great because it's like, you're not stupid, right? But
I thought I was.
no, yeah, but so an event happens and then we interpret it. So the gift is knowing that you're not your thoughts.
That's a really good point, thank you. Oh, is my microphone on? Hi, is my microphone on? There we go. All right. Chris, same question, some thoughts on imposter syndrome and overcoming it.
So first, speaking from experience, no, it never goes away. But for me, trying to get out of those moments where I'm like, I don't belong here, they made a big mistake, Stanford's gonna come take the PhD away, Raphael's gonna say, sorry, we didn't really mean to hire you as the director of libraries, see you later. Like those things come up. And please don't answer that, Raphael. Please don't respond. But a couple of things. One is, build your support system. All of us hopefully can find and should find people in our lives who do believe in us and who will talk us out of that and will point out the facts. Because I agree with Kip so much that like our feelings are not facts, right? The other thing, honestly, I have to tell a quick story. While I was still at Stanford, I think it was right after MIT offered me this job, and I was still having these moments of, they must not have meant it, and I'm going to fail, and blah, blah, blah. And a friend of mine who was in the English department at Stanford said, well, gosh, you're just really brilliant then. You managed to convince some sociology faculty at Stanford to give you a PhD even though you didn't deserve it. You convinced the director of the libraries at Stanford to give you a bunch of jobs that you didn't deserve, and you convinced MIT to give you a job you didn't deserve. You're really good at something then. And it just sort of took all the power out of it for me. So I pass those words along if it's helpful to anyone else.
I'm definitely using that. That's such a good angle. So if anything, you're just a master manipulator, and that gets you through life. Yeah, there you go. Bill, do you have any thoughts on imposter syndrome?
Sure. Well, first of all, kind of politicians kind of define imposter, right? I'm serious. They're always play acting, and they're acting to different people in different ways in order to be able to make sure. The goal of a politician is to get reelected, and so everything else doesn't matter to them. But nonetheless, I ran medical facilities with a bachelor's in history from UMass Boston, all right? For 42 years, I ran healthcare institutions. And, so one of the things that, actually what you said about vulnerability and stuff like that, what I found is that, personality matters a lot, attitude matters a lot. Being willing to accept other people as, what their expertise is and all that is just really matters a lot. And I always was really honest with anybody that worked with me or whatever. If I didn't know something was going on, I was like, okay, teach me this, right? Teach me what's going on. They knew that the buck stopped with me and I had to make decisions at some point, but I was always very, very open to, to criticism, to pushback. I hired people based on their willingness to tell me off, really, and tell me like what they needed in order to succeed. How do I get this barrier away from you in order to make sure that you can do your job? those are, the kind of things that you learn. People appreciate that and, are willing to go along, even though they probably think that you're kind of a dope. But overall, I worked with people that were extremely well educated my entire life. I didn't have any difficulty with it. I think because of that kind of vulnerability, willingness to be vulnerable, to be, that, hey, I don't know this stuff. Tell me about it, all right? I'm here because I can maneuver the levers and make things go easier or call the right person or whatever. That's what a CEO does. I don't have to know anything beyond that. All I have to know is how to hire really smart people.
It's a really interesting point because in my previous life before I worked at MIT, I directed stories for radio. And everyone's favorite person to direct a story for radio with was a scientist. And we would sometimes get these wonderful scientists, some from MIT, some from Harvard, and they would be these incredibly accomplished people that had done these incredible things, but they were like, I don't know how to tell a story on the radio, so I'm here, help me out as much as you would like. And they came in with a great humbleness about, and obviously a really good work ethic, about learning something new. And so everybody always loved to get the scientists because they were the ones who were like, yeah, teach me, I want to learn. It seems very familiar. Please excuse me while I enter the iPad code again. It's going to be a theme. Okay, another question for everyone, but I'm going to start with you, Kip, because this sounds like it speaks a lot to you. I'm an entrepreneur, and a failure may be a normal thing for people like me. But if I fail many times in my business, should I stop trying because it will have a negative impact on my life and my family's life? If it means I'm not, or does it mean I'm not suitable for starting a business?
Oh boy, no. I think it depends on your circumstances, but for me, I had to learn how to compartmentalize so that when I'm home, I'm home. When I'm at work, I'm at work. And that negative, it sounds like there's a lot of negative self-talk going on in your soul. And I think the question you have to ask yourself is, does this entrepreneurship bring me joy? Does it excite and delight in me? Because if it does, you can work anything out. You can work anything out. But if you're doing it out of should, or I want to look good, you got to look at what motives are making you want to be an entrepreneur. And you'll get that answer. So it's tapping into the desire, because if there's a desire, you can make it all work.
Thank you. And anyone else on our panel want to respond to that question?
Well, I don't know anything about being an entrepreneur, so let's just lay that out. But I do know that in my own experience, if you are finding joy in the work, if you find something that you love to do, you will find success in it. That was some advice I got. I was struggling between two different dissertation topics, and one I thought was, gonna get me a job on the tenure track, but the other one I was really passionate about. And the best advice I got was, you're gonna have to live with this dissertation for a little while, and it's gonna suck, so you better pick a topic you love. And it was wonderful advice. So I think it fits here as well.
I started, is this my getting out there? Okay, yeah, good. I've started a number of different organizations in my life. Started a couple, helped to start 2 schools. I started the statewide nonprofit association. Started a Center for Community Health Education Research and Service at Northeastern. There's a whole bunch of different things that I was involved in starting. And to tell you the truth, it was all a kind of a practical aspect of how do we make change. And sometimes changing individual institutions is really difficult. So it's just easier to go outside the institution and kind of try to influence it from the outside by starting something. And those are, things that I got great joy out of, actually. And, you got to do things that you get joy from. And even if it fails, I've been part of numerous failures that I've had to kind of just close up shop on. But But overall, it just, you're always trying to make, what my motivation was always, how do we make life better for the low-income people that lived in my neighborhood? And that was, if we could figure out some way of doing stuff like that, I got great joy out of it. And so there was a lot of entrepreneurship involved in those things, and that's, that was great. I think entrepreneurship kept me at Codman Square for a lot longer than I would have been there. It just saw an opportunity to create a school, or the person who I am now married to actually approached me 20 years ago and said, I got this idea of starting a school inside of a health center, inside of a medical facility, so that the students, the professionalism of the medical world would rub off on them and they'd want to become healthcare professionals. And I said, great idea, let's do it. And that probably kept me for another 10 years, because it was like, how do you blend medical and education, right? How do you blend the doctors walking in the hallways with the high school students that were also walking in the hallways, who, were kids from really tough neighborhoods. And that was something that in the early days, there was a locked door between where the school was and where the health center was, at the request of the nurses, actually. And the kids kept on going on, into this bar that would set off alarms and stuff like that. And so eventually the head of maintenance said, don't put that alarm on, just unlock the door and see what happens. And so the kids started wandering around in the hallways as you'd wind up. Now it's like a whole thing where the kids eat lunch in the same place that the doctors and nurses and dentists and radiologists and all those people eat, and it's the quietest imaginable cafeteria you'll ever find in a school. But in those days, it was one of those things where they didn't want those kids anywhere near them, and now they've kind of all adopted them. So it's like one of those things. It's entrepreneurship, and you're pushing the envelope of what is possible. A school inside a medical facility, and that was just such an intriguing idea that it kept me there for another 10 years.
Thank you. President Reif, a question for you. I can relate to studying in a language I didn't speak or write. I moved to a different country because writing the thesis was difficult. What kept you going?
I don't think I felt I had options. I mean, the only option I had was to quit and go back home, back to Venezuela, and that was the only option I had. So why not try as hard as I can for as long as I can? I can always end up going back. So what kept me going is that I had no other option. I mean, I didn't come to America to stay. I didn't come to America as an immigrant. I came to America with a particular goal. I wanted a PhD to go back home and to have my job there. That was my whole goal. And if I couldn't accomplish it, I would have to go back. So that's pretty much, it's very simple. I mean, a very precise focus, and I was driven to try to get there. If I didn't get there, I would just be embarrassed and go back home, but that was it.
Thank you for sharing that. Chris, a question for you. It frequently, and then it says in parentheses, always, feels like our failures are because we are failures. How did you make this distinction, and what did it take?
Oh, that's such a great question. I think I still struggle with that. If I'm honest, I still struggle with that. And certainly in that story I told you, I felt like I had failed and therefore I was a failure. I mean, I think it goes back to some of the earlier question. I mean, having people in your corner who will look you in the face and say, you are not a failure. Look at what you've accomplished. Look at what you've done. That helps. I was lucky enough to have people who did that for me. And I think it's also about, eventually sort of licking your wounds and getting back in the fight, if you will, and trying the next thing and having the courage to have another idea or try another thing and have it work and sort of, have some successes. But I have to go back to what Kip said. I mean, it's also all about just really, really, really training yourself to know that your feelings aren't facts. And feeling like I am a failure does not equal the fact that I am a failure. It is a feeling. I am feeling that at the time. And I can look at the facts of my life and say, that's actually not true. It's true that I feel that, and I should tend to that feeling, but it's not factually true.
Feelings, not facts. I'm going to hold that one with me. Kip, a question for you. One I think close to the heart, probably a lot of people in this room. How do you balance having a family and starting a company?
How did I?
How did you, and how do we all do it? What is the secret?
Golly. So I think, well, one of the things about me is I don't need a lot of sleep, which is really a gift. You know, and I do think that is attributed because I meditate, because the more you meditate, the more you calm the amygdala, which is a fact, and the prefrontal cortex. So that I would highly recommend. I think it's getting support. I think it's whoever is at home with you is really working out some agreements so that you can not have dissonance on the home front. And I also think it's focus. You know, I mean, we all have 24 hours in a day. Successful people build great habits. And for me, it's getting up, it's meditate. You know, I have a whole regimen, and I think it's being focused, because when you focus on building really great habits, you will be amazed at how much time you have. And my kids were and are always a priority. Always a priority. Like even in meetings, I take their phone calls. I mean, it's just something that I have always done in my life. So I think it's you know, there's no such thing as balance. There's focus, right? So there'll be weeks when I'm out a lot, but then there are other weeks where I'm totally on the home front. So I think it's also living into what life is and knowing it's living it to its fullest with your kids and your family. I mean, it worked for me. I mean, listen, my story, there were lots of lows, and lots of times when I felt like I failed, and lots of times when my kids would yell at me because they thought I was doing for myself. But you have to also self-care a lot. You really do. That's what I learned through tragedy.
I got to work on the sleep side of that. I need more. I have to work on the sleep side of that equation. I got to get those 7 hours minimum. Bill, a question for you. This person writes, I sometimes lose sight of the purpose of doing something. So when you ran for office, how did you find the balance of being Bill, the candidate for office, doing campaigns and raising funds, with being like Bill, the person who wanted to help make people's lives better?
Well, I think it's probably why I failed. So I've always had difficulty play acting other people, and you know, there were opportunities to say things that were going to get me some points and stuff like that, and I recognized all along that was it just wasn't going to be me, and I was not going to run a campaign where I was embarrassed by it afterwards. I didn't care if I went down in flames, so long as I held onto my integrity, and that hey, so I went down in flames. It would have been great to be mayor of Boston. It really would. It's the most powerful political position in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, by far more powerful than the governor, because the mayor of Boston controls every lever in the city of Boston, every single lever. And so that is, amazing. And then when you found out, like when I was trying to make a decision, there were like 80 cranes in Boston that were up at the time, which meant that the property taxes were going to go through the roof during whoever was going to win that race. And I was thinking, imagine what you could do with that kind of money. We could rebuild the coastal areas of Boston so that we could, deal with it. Marty Walsh had $2.25 billion additional dollars than when he took office because of the fact of all those the new properties that went in. So I was thinking, this would be great. On the other hand, when my campaign manager would tell me, you got to take a stand on this issue this way or it's going to end. I said, no, I can't do that. I don't believe that. So So that's one of the things that, I would guess that unsuccessful politicians regularly stay true to their beliefs. And successful ones don't. You look at some of the jokers we have running for office now, it's like, it's amazing that people actually vote for these people, knowing that they lie, cheat, they do all sorts of things, and they still get elected. But you realize that, well, I gave it a try, I lost, and there's other things I can do. And I keep myself really busy. I do. We have a dedication of a Japanese forest bathing micro healing forest that's on, about as well. You could fit about 7 of them in this room. But we have built this forest in Codman Square, in one of the densest parts of the city of Boston. It's going to be dedicated on Tuesday. I'm trying to get an independent bookstore into Dorchester, because those are just great community building experiences. You can do a lot of stuff with that, with what's available, even though it would have been really fun to be mayor of Boston.
It would be fun. But it does sound like you found a different way to channel, like, the thing that matters is not the fit for mayor of Boston, but is the fit for all these other things. Sad but true, maybe. Okay. On that dark note, I have a question for everyone, which is about mentorship, which is how important is mentorship to you as you go through your life and with your careers, of your ups and downs? Do you think it's important, and how do you find a mentor? President Reif, if I come to you first.
I don't know that I have a good answer for that. I don't think that I don't think I have ever experienced true mentorship in my career. I basically found my own way doing things, which I don't think is the easiest way at all to do it, but that's the way I found myself. So I don't know how to answer that. I think, but what I can say is that if you do find a mentor, it would be very helpful. But I cannot share an experience on that.
Yeah, I also, I don't think I ever had a mentor. I mean, if anything, I would say that reading inspirational books. I think Nelson Mandela's Long Walk to Freedom is just like, inspirational to me. Kind of, as a guy that really devoted his life to his cause. And, every once in a while when you start wavering, it's always good to kind of reread stuff like that. But I can tell you one thing, I have never refused anyone who has asked me to be a mentor or to meet or to tell them how to get into the nonprofit sector or how do we get a job in a health center or, do you know anybody at the hospital that you can advocate for me? I have never refused a single person on that because I do believe that, it really is like kind of, people that get you access, it's like, you apply for a job and the chances, of getting an interview is really slim because there's so many people applying for a lot of these jobs. But if you have somebody that can say, hey, you got to give this person an interview, they came and saw me, they're nice people, do me a favor on that. And we all do favors for each other, in this kind of upper level kind of stuff. So, so I think it's really important for you to ask. If you need somebody, if you need advice or something like that, hey, I'm billwalczak@gmail.com. If you want to go into the nonprofit sector or, community health or public health or whatever, I'm happy to help, because I think it's really important that people that ask get a chance to do it,
So I think mentorship is super important, and I've had some very good mentors in my life, and most of the best mentors that I've had, I just picked them and said, you're going to be my mentor. And the best ones are people that I picked not because they had a job I wanted necessarily, but because they were living a life in a way that I wanted to live my life. And I think that makes a big difference. I think that goes back to that work-family balance kind of question and the finding joy in your life. And so when I meet people who seem to be thriving and enjoying their life, I want to know what they did and how they did it because that's what I want out of my life too. And so I just think that's really important. I also think, jobs are changing so rapidly. If you pick somebody who's got a job that you want, that job may not be there by the time, 10 years from now. It might be or the path to get to that job will have changed dramatically. So that's just, I think mentorship is really important, but I think for me, it's been about picking people who have a life that I want and that I admire rather than necessarily a particular job that I want.
Great point. Kip, do you have anything to add?
Yes, I too, especially now with this, coming out of post-pandemic, I think mentorship is almost essential. And I say it to my staff all the time, you got to find a mentor. And I agree, it doesn't have to necessarily be, if you're wanting to have a particular job, but it's so critical to be able to have support from someone, because look at what we've just been talking about. When we live in our own selves, those negative thoughts, there's 70,000 that go on in your mind, and 85% of them are negative. So if you leave your life to just you, you're always going to be coming up against kind of a ceiling, and you need someone that can stretch you and support you. And the one other thing I'll say about mentorship is that it's incumbent on you to bring to the session what you're looking out of it, right? And so as a mentor, I'll mentor anyone. You're doing the work. I'm holding a mirror up to you. We're looking at the negative self-talk. We're looking at where your breakdowns are. And so as long as you are in it to do the work, I think, to your point, anyone will say yes to you. Anyone will say yes to you. And I just think to have a cadre and a network of people that you can turn to for different reasons is really critical for personal and professional growth.
On that awesomely uplifting note, which I really think was a great place to wrap up, we've reached the end of our program. I want to thank a couple people before we wrap up. I would like to thank the MIT Women's League, the Graduate Student Council, MIT Vista, our friend John Werner, MIT AV, who are working hard behind the scenes, and the entire team and volunteers at FAIL who worked so hard to put this program together. I want to thank all of you for being here. And I want to thank our amazing speakers. That's Bill Walczak, Kip Hollister, Chris Berg, and President Reif. Thank you so much.
I have one last question for President Reif. Congratulations on your leadership. I'm curious, how do you think MIT is doing at facilitating this concept that this group has been set up to kind of think about, and where do you think it could go in terms of getting better at this?
Well, I think it's a great idea. That's why I came. What on earth are you doing here? And I think it's a great way to. I think the imposter syndrome, you asked the question earlier, is something that is all over the place, and everybody feels that everybody else is smarter. I remember when I was in the ECS department as a faculty member, you know that the system is of undergraduate advisees. You have somebody here, comes as a sophomore, and then 2 years later they graduate, and then you have a new group of sophomores. And for several years, for several groups of sophomores that I had like 18 to 20 of those, and on registration day, they would come to my office. These are sophomores on the first day, and they come, and within 5 minutes, they're crying. And why are they crying? Because they say, everybody else is smarter than me. And they leave the office, comes the next one, within 5 minutes, crying. So that's what we do to people here. It's terrible. So I think the whole idea of sharing all that experience, that is really common to all of us, I think is terrific. What to do beyond this, I think what you're doing is great. I think I don't know exactly how you are advertising or marketing this, so to speak. And people may be a little uncomfortable coming. Again, that's the reason why I'm here. I think it's a great idea, and I think the more people know that you're doing this, I think the more people will benefit. So I don't have any suggestions of what to do better. I think you're doing fine. If you bring people like the four of us here, and you bring a great questionnaire like Kristen here, I think you're doing great.